Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at VR.
Ooh, virtual reality.
Yeah, we've got a ton of articles and research and all that good stuff.
That sounds awesome.
It is really cool stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to go like way back to the very, very beginnings.
Oh, wow.
All the way up to today. Can't see how we got where we are.
I'm excited.
Me too. I'm really fascinated by this one. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, when I think VR, I think cutting edge headsets and all the games and stuff.
Yeah, sure.
But the truth is, it's a much longer story than that.
Yeah. I did not realize how much further back it went.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin with this?
Well, believe it or not, we're going to start way back in the Renaissance.
Wow.
So think about like Da Vinci, and these artists that were really mastering perspective to create that illusion of depth on a flat canvas.
Right.
So essentially they were kind of tricking the eye in a way,
I see. Yeah.
Creating a sense of three-dimensionality where there really isn't any.
So those paintings back then were kind of like early VR experiences.
Exactly.
Wow. That's incredible.
And that fascination with creating these immersive visuals that continued,
Yeah.
In the 19th century, we have the stereoscope,
Uh-huh.
which uses two slightly offset images to create a 3D effect.
Okay.
Remember Viewmasters?
Oh, yeah, of course. Those are the best.
Yeah, that's stereoscopy in action.
Wow.
Bringing 3D scenes to life right before your eyes.
That's so cool. Yeah, I remember spending hours just like
totally
lost in those little worlds.
Me too.
But those are just static images, right?
Yeah.
When did things start to get a little more dynamic and interactive?
Well, things got a lot more ambitious in the mid-20th century.
Okay.
There's this guy named Morton Heilig.
Okay.
And in 1957, he created the Sensorama machine.
Okay.
Now, this thing was wild. It combined visuals and sounds, vibrations, even smells,
Wow.
to try to create this total multisensory experience.
Wow. That sounds ahead of its time.
It really was. It was like an attempt to completely immerse the viewer in the film.
Yeah.
Engaging all of their senses.
What an interesting idea. I mean, especially for back then.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and so when we talk about the term virtual reality, most people associate that with modern technology, but the term itself actually goes back a bit further.
Okay.
So the phrase la réalité virtuelle actually appeared in 1938.
Okay.
It was used by a French playwright named Antonin Artaud, and he was talking about the illusory nature of theater.
Interesting.
And how it creates this kind of separate world.
Yeah.
But the English translation of virtual reality didn't actually show up until 1958.
Wow. So the idea had been around for quite a while before we actually had the tech to really...
Exactly. It was kind of waiting for the tech to catch up.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So then things really start to speed up in the 1960s.
Okay.
And we get some big inventions that lay the groundwork for VR as we know it today.
Okay.
So one of the biggest milestones happened in 1968. And this was the creation of something called the Sword of Damocles.
What? That sounds intense.
Right. It was created by a computer scientist named Ivan Sutherland and his student Bob Sproul.
Okay.
Now, this wasn't exactly like the sleek headset we know today.
Yeah.
It was bulky, this big head-mounted display that had to be suspended from the ceiling.
Oh, wow.
Because it was so heavy.
Oh, my gosh.
But it was the first system to actually overlay computer-generated graphics onto the real world.
So even though it was like super clunky, it was a huge step forward.
A revolutionary step. Yeah.
Wow.
It introduced the whole idea of a head-mounted display.
Right, which we just think of as VR now.
Exactly.
Huh.
And that invention really set the stage for everything that came after it.
Yeah.
And from the 1970s on, we started to see VR development branching out.
Okay.
Becoming more practical for different fields.
Right.
Flight simulators got more sophisticated, allowed pilots to train in these realistic virtual environments.
Yeah.
And then in 1978, there was the Aspen movie map.
What was that?
This was basically a virtual tour of Aspen, Colorado.
Oh, wow. So that's an early example of virtual tourism.
Huh. That's really cool.
Yeah. Even the automotive industry started using VR.
Really?
Yeah, to design cars.
Wow.
Visualizing and interacting with these 3D models before they actually built physical prototypes.
Interesting. So it seems like these early years, it was really about functionality. Less about creating these crazy immersive experiences and more about solving these real world problems.
Absolutely.
So when did the whole consumer focus thing start? Like when did companies actually start trying to bring VR into our homes?
Well, the first real attempts to bring VR to the masses were in the late 80s and early 90s.
Okay.
We had companies like Sega and Nintendo kind of dip their toes in the water.
Right.
Sega introduced the Sega VR1.
Okay.
And Nintendo released the Virtual Boy.
Oh, yeah.
Which was a console focused on those 3D gaming experiences.
Yeah, I remember the Virtual Boy.
Yeah.
Wasn't that the one that was giving everyone headaches?
You're not wrong. It was a good effort.
Yeah, both of those faced some pretty significant challenges.
Yeah.
The technology just wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
The headsets were bulky and uncomfortable, the graphics were limited,
Right.
and the processing power just wasn't strong enough.
Yeah.
But even though they weren't big commercial successes, they were a super important step forward.
Yeah.
They kept that dream of widespread VR alive.
Yeah.
And really pushed developers to keep going.
I see. So all of that was essential in getting to where we are now.
Exactly.
Yeah. What were the advancements that really made modern VR possible? Like what really changed everything?
Well, that's a great question, and that's exactly where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay, great.
We'll explore that leap forward that happened in the 2010s.
Okay.
And how this device that seems totally unrelated, the smartphone, actually played a huge role.
Wow. Okay.
Can't wait.
I'm excited.
Me too.
Welcome back. So as we kind of move into the evolution of VR, you know, the 2010s really stand out.
That was the decade where virtual reality really started to come into its own, you know?
Yeah. It's amazing how quickly it went from like those clunky headsets in the 90s that gave everyone headaches to the really sleek stuff we see today.
Totally.
Like, how did that even happen?
Yeah.
What were the big breakthroughs that made modern VR possible?
You might be surprised to hear this.
Okay.
But one of the biggest factors in the VR revolution was the smartphone.
The smartphone? Wait, really?
I know, right? It doesn't seem...
That seems like a totally different thing.
I know it's kind of counterintuitive, but think about it. Smartphones are basically just like little tiny supercomputers, right?
Yeah.
And as they evolved, they became packed with all this tech that was perfect for VR.
Okay.
You've got your high-resolution screens for visuals,
Right.
gyroscopes and motion sensors for tracking, and powerful processors that can actually handle creating these virtual worlds.
So they weren't just phones. They were like building blocks for VR.
Exactly.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, and as these components became more advanced and more importantly more affordable, they became accessible to all these VR developers, driving down costs and leading to a ton of innovation.
Right.
But the big turning point, you know, the moment that really brought VR back into the spotlight, it was in 2012 with this company called Oculus and their Kickstarter for the Oculus Rift.
Oh, the Oculus Rift. Yeah. I remember that. It was huge.
Yeah.
That was when everyone was like, oh, VR is actually coming back.
Totally. Yeah. It was a big deal.
And for good reason, too, I think.
Absolutely.
I mean, it showed that VR could be really, really immersive and engaging.
Yeah. It showed the potential, you know? Yeah. And that Kickstarter was a smash hit.
It was, yeah.
They raised over $2.4 million.
Wow.
And it got the attention of a lot of big investors.
That makes sense.
So, yeah, it really kind of put VR back on the map, you know?
Right.
And it led to this huge wave of investment and development.
So it was like a shot in the arm for the whole VR industry.
It totally was.
But Oculus wasn't the only one in the game.
Oh, no, of course not.
There were other companies that were getting involved, too.
Yeah, for sure.
What were some of those?
So you had companies like HTC, Sony, Valve all kind of jumping into the VR arena.
Okay.
And that led to this explosion of innovation and competition, which was great.
Yeah.
You know, we started to see things like inside-out tracking.
Yeah.
So you didn't need all those external sensors anymore.
Yeah.
So people could move around more freely.
Yeah.
And then you had standalone headsets.
Like the Oculus Quest.
Exactly, like the Oculus Quest.
Yeah.
So you could cut the cord from the PC.
Right.
VR became way more portable, more accessible.
Yeah, it feels like it all happened so fast.
It did. It was like boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, you had the high-resolution displays, the better optics, hand tracking.
Oh, yeah, haptics, too.
Haptic feedback, yeah.
Where you could actually feel stuff.
It was a wild time to be following VR.
It was a really exciting time, for sure.
It was really exciting. But as all that stuff improved, as the tech got better and it got cheaper, the potential applications kind of started to go beyond just gaming, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like it became clear that VR could be used in all sorts of different industries.
Yeah.
Like healthcare, education, engineering, even art.
Yeah, it was amazing to see it branching out like that.
It really was, yeah. So let's dive into some of those real-world applications.
Oh.
I've heard about surgeons using VR to practice surgeries and architects using it to design buildings.
Yeah.
Like way before they even start building.
That's right.
What are some of the most like groundbreaking ways that VR is being used right now?
Well, one of the most exciting areas is definitely healthcare.
Okay.
VR is being used to train medical professionals in a really safe and controlled environment. So, like, imagine a surgeon being able to practice a complicated heart surgery multiple times in VR before ever stepping foot in an operating room.
That makes so much sense.
Right.
It's like a flight simulator, but for surgery.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And I've also heard about VR being used to treat things like phobias.
Oh, yeah.
And anxiety.
VR therapy is becoming really popular. Yeah. And it's for good reason. Like, imagine someone with a fear of heights.
Okay.
They can actually confront that fear in a virtual environment.
Yeah.
You know, they can start by standing on a virtual balcony, a couple stories up, and slowly work their way up to higher and higher places, you know, building their confidence and getting more comfortable with it.
That sounds so helpful.
It's amazing.
There are people that are struggling with that.
Yeah.
It could be huge.
And then you have the potential in education.
Oh, yeah. Education.
I mean, think about it. Students could step back in time and witness historical events.
Wow.
Or explore the human body from the inside out.
Yeah.
Or even travel to different planets.
Yeah.
All without leaving the classroom.
It's mind-blowing. It's so different from how I learned in school.
That's incredible.
Wow. Are there any, like, specific VR education programs that you think are particularly cool?
Well, there's so many, but one that comes to mind is Google Expeditions.
Okay.
That one lets students go on virtual field trips to all these amazing places.
Like where?
Like the Great Wall of China.
Wow.
The Amazon rainforest.
Okay.
Even the surface of Mars.
That's awesome.
And then you have programs like Tilt Brush.
Okay.
Which lets students paint and sculpt in 3D.
Wow. I wish they had that when I was in school.
I know, right?
That's amazing. So it really feels like VR is changing the way we learn, the way we train, even the way we heal.
Yeah.
But what about other fields like engineering and design?
Oh, VR is transforming those too.
Okay.
Architects can use VR to create these immersive walkthroughs of their building designs.
Yeah.
So clients can actually experience the building before it's even built.
That's so cool.
Yeah, right.
It's amazing.
They can give feedback early on, make sure the design is what they want, and it can help prevent costly mistakes later.
I see, yeah.
And then engineers can use VR to visualize these complex 3D models of machines or vehicles or even entire factories.
Wow.
They can identify potential issues, they can optimize designs, and they can collaborate better.
It's really becoming an essential tool for so many different things.
It is. It really is.
But with all this potential, we have to remember that VR is still pretty new.
It is a young technology. And like any powerful technology, there's always a flip side. Right? We have to think about the ethical considerations.
Right, because it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of new tech.
Totally.
And forget about some of the potential downsides.
Yeah.
So what are some of those ethical concerns that we should be thinking about?
As VR starts to become more and more a part of our lives.
Well, welcome back to our deep dive into virtual reality. So we've talked about the history of VR. We've seen all those amazing advancements that have brought us to where we are now.
Yeah.
And it's clear that VR has the potential to, like, revolutionize so many different fields.
It really does.
But as we're, you know, kind of on the verge of this VR revolution, we have to think about the ethical side of things, too.
Absolutely. You know, it's like with any new powerful technology. There are always those ethical considerations that we have to be aware of.
Right. So what are some of the things that we should be thinking about as VR becomes, you know, more and more a part of our lives?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is privacy.
Privacy, yeah.
I mean, these VR systems, they collect a ton of data about us.
Yeah.
When we're in those virtual environments.
Like what kind of data?
So everything from our physical movements to our eye tracking data.
Okay.
Even our emotional responses to certain things.
Wow.
And, you know, this data is really valuable.
Yeah.
It's valuable to companies who might want to use it for things like targeted advertising, market research, maybe even some not so great things.
It's a little creepy to think that everything we're doing in VR is being tracked.
It is a little unsettling.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to have your online activity tracked, but to have like your physical movements and even your emotions tracked in VR.
Yeah, that's a whole other level.
Yeah, it feels different.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think, you know, as the tech gets even better, we need to start asking some tough questions.
What?
Well, who owns that data?
Yeah.
How is it being protected?
Right.
Who has access to it?
Yeah.
And how can we make sure that it's not being used to manipulate us?
Those are all really good questions.
Yeah, it's something we need to think about.
Yeah. It feels like there's a lot of potential for VR to be misused.
There is, and we need to be aware of that.
Yeah.
We also need to consider the psychological impact.
Oh, yeah, the psychological impact.
VR,
Yeah.
As those experiences get more and more realistic, those lines between virtual reality and real life can start to blur a little.
Right.
And that could potentially lead to people kind of disconnecting from the real world. Maybe becoming more isolated or even getting addicted to VR.
Right. Like anything else, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Right.
VR can be amazing, for learning, exploring, connecting with people. But if it becomes our main way of interacting with the world, we might start to lose touch with what's real.
Right. And the people around us.
Exactly.
And then there's the whole issue of accessibility, too.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, VR can be expensive.
Yeah.
And that could lead to a situation where only certain people have access to it.
Yeah.
People who can afford it.
Right.
And that could make existing inequalities even worse.
Right. Especially in areas like education.
Yeah, education, healthcare, all those things.
Yeah.
Where VR could actually really make a positive difference. Right. So it's important to make sure that everyone has a chance to benefit.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
It shouldn't just be for a select few.
Exactly.
I have to say, despite all of these concerns, I'm still pretty optimistic about the future of VR.
Me too.
It just seems like it has so much potential for good.
It does.
Like connecting people, fostering empathy, even creating new forms of art.
Absolutely. It's a really powerful tool.
Yeah.
And like any tool, it can be used in positive ways or negative ways. So I think it really comes down to us, Developers need to create ethical and responsible VR experiences. Policymakers need to think about regulations to protect users' privacy and safety.
Yeah.
And we all need to be having these conversations about how we want this technology to shape our world.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
It feels like we've only just scratched the surface, though.
I know, right? There's so much more to explore.
There's so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
But I think we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
We've seen how far VR has come.
Yeah.
And we've glimpsed the incredible potential it has. But we've also acknowledged the challenges that lie ahead.
Right.
So thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the world of virtual reality.
It's been a pleasure.
I hope you learned something new and that you'll continue to explore this amazing and rapidly evolving technology.
Me too.
Until next time.